We Outdoors Nation, welcome to this episode of the podcast. Today we're joined by Emmy Award-winning storyteller and filmmaker Sarah Moshman. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sarah, what should the world know about you? Where are you? Who are you? What's happening in your world? Tell us everything.
Yeah, so I'm in Los Angeles on the west coast of the U.S. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm really passionate about showcasing women's stories and strong female role models on screen. So I'm a filmmaker, teacher, speaker, author, and everything I do tags back to that goal. So that's me.
That's super cool. And we found you, and I want to start with the obvious place of where we originally found you and went, holy smoke, this is super cool. You were, so I've had friends who've rowed across the Atlantic Ocean. I've had friends who've kayaked across the Atlantic Ocean. I've had friends who've sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. And then suddenly Mel, who works with us, was like, hey, check out this Sarah girl. She's made a film about a group of ladies rowing across the Pacific. Like, that's double the size of the Atlantic Ocean.
Is it? I can imagine. Wow.
That's amazing. Just tell me, how did you stumble upon this project of mostly English ladies, in fact, all English ladies, right?
Actually, one's from South Africa. You should definitely talk to Lizanne. She's living in Cape Town.
Really? I watched the movie yesterday. I didn't pick up on that. Right, Lizanne, I'm going to go and have a conversation with her as well. So you've got ladies from the other side of the world who you stumble across who've got this objective of rowing 8,500 miles across the Atlantic. Like, what happened? How did it work?
Yeah, across the Pacific.
The Pacific. Sorry.
So this was in 2015. I had made a different film called The Empowerment Project: Ordinary Women Doing Extraordinary Things, where I drove across the United States and I interviewed inspirational women from all different industries and careers, from like a pilot to an athlete and an astronaut and all these incredible women. And so in the promoting of that film, I met this wonderful woman named Fiona, who's a blogger in the UK. She runs a blog called Womanthology UK, which helps shine a light on stories of amazing women, which is very similar to what I do. Anyway, so in late January 2015, I'll never forget, I got this very innocent email saying, hey, Sarah, I just came across this story. There's these 4 British women. At the time, it was 4 women who are going to get in a pink 29-foot ocean rowing boat. And their plan is to row across the Pacific Ocean. I thought you might want to know about it. It was just such an innocent email because, to be clear to your listeners, I am not an athlete. I love the outdoors, but I have never rowed at all, ever. I really knew nothing about the sport, and in many ways, I still don't. But something about this was so intriguing to me, and I didn't know if anyone already was telling their story. I didn't know what I was getting myself into by agreeing to Skype with them the next day. So I honestly went into that first conversation thinking, like, maybe they just want to know what GoPro to buy. I'm happy to help any way I can. But by the end of that hour-long conversation with Laura Penhall and Natalia Cohen, 2 of the rowers, I was just hooked. I thought, this is so extraordinary. How is it possible that no one is telling their story? Like, they had no camera crew involved, no director, no nothing. They were just going to go and maybe capture a couple pictures. And I thought, well, what a tragedy that would be if you set these world records and there's no film to go with it, right? So even though I knew nothing about rowing, I had no budget in place, no resources, truly just a passion to tell the story and curiosity and, blind enthusiasm, I guess, to showcase these incredible heroes. It was less than 3 months later, I found myself on the dock in San Francisco, watching them row away. So, I bought them cameras. I taught them how to use the cameras, the microphones, the hard drives. so they could really tell their own story at sea. Because even if I had wanted to go with them, which I didn't at the beginning, by the end I was like, take me with you. So even if I had wanted to go with them, I wasn't able to. There was no camera boat, no follow boat, like nothing. People often think there was like this whole crew around them, but no, it was just them alone at sea. That was part of the world record that they were setting. So they had to be able to tell their own story at sea. And then I would meet them on land along the way to kind of fill in the blanks and to create the larger narrative and do interviews and get drone footage and eat with them on land. They were like the most fun people ever to eat with because they had been eating mush and expedition food for months at a time. So it was kind of like eating with 4 pregnant ladies on land. They ate all the burgers and all of the cupcakes, and it was just like, it was really fun. So
That's incredible. And it's incredible to make a documentary to tell a story where the filmmaker can't be present for most of that experience. Like that is, that's trusting the fate of a story completely in other people's hands, because you have no idea what footage you're going to get at the other end, right?
Yeah. So the way that it worked is they were able to blog every day. So they had like a sliver of internet every day in this device called the Iridium Go. And they had an iPad on the boat that had, some charge. And so every day in the notes app of the iPad, they would take turns writing a blog post for their website. And then they would email that through their social media manager, and it would end up on their website. So basically each day, although I was not physically with them, I could read about what they were going through as well as see where they were in the world, because the GPS tracker was updating every about 4 hours. So I could see, oh gosh, they went 10 miles in the wrong direction today. Or, oh wow, they made 35 miles of progress today. I wonder what tomorrow will bring. So I knew a bit about what they were going through emotionally. And then I would read that email. I read that blog post and I would email them and say, okay, Emma, you said you were struggling today, that you're kind of really not enjoying this right now. Here are 5 interview questions for you to answer whenever you can in the cabin alone on the boat. And so we had several different cameras on the boat, but we kind of had one that was like specifically for interviews for like inside the cabin. That had like the good microphone and the nice lens that was not waterproof. And
That's
then we
very
had
trusting.
GoPros. Yes, we had GoPros that mostly lived outside in different spots on the boat for them to show off the sunsets and the wildlife and obviously the rowing itself, which took up a lot of footage. So yeah, although I was not with them, I feel very grateful that I got to be engaged with them every day. But I didn't know if they were filming that interview I asked them to get until like 2-3 months later when we would get to land, because this was a 3-stage journey. So this was San Francisco to Hawaii, Hawaii to Samoa, and then Samoa over to Cairns in Australia. And so I was there waiting, every time they would get to land. And then I would collect the hard drives from the boat and just pray that anything was on them. How is it? Those were waterproof, thank goodness. But just the nerves of plugging it into the computer for the first time and just like praying that there was just even one shot on there from the months they had just been at sea. And then I would nervously back up the footage like 3 times to make sure it was all very safe. So yeah, it was, as I talk about it in hindsight, it all sounds nuts. Like, who would sign up for this? But that was kind of the magic of it, is just not knowing how it was going to turn out. I didn't know if they were going to make it all the way or not, or if a weekend they'd be like, this is terrible, let's not do this. But I wanted to see what would happen. And I believed that people all over the world would also want to watch this journey. So that's kind of what drove me forward. Not to mention, they were so unbelievably inspirational to me every single hour of the day. And I never felt like, hey, I can't complain. Yeah, I've got to apply for grants and try to raise money and log this footage, but I'm sitting here warm and dry in my office and they are out there, and I live in California, so I can even go to the Pacific Ocean and look out and think about it, about how hard they were working every single hour of the day. And that was the ultimate motivator.
Wow. So there's a little observation for you. Us Brits, we have a little habit, and I am not surprised at all that there was 4 females who are going to go row across the Pacific and not document it, not write about it, and it hadn't even occurred to them.
Right.
I'm not surprised in the slightest. I kayaked around the UK a few years ago, a few years ago, and I got my kayak, my big expedition sea kayak, and I got on the water and disappeared for a few months, and then came back and then went back to work. And then when I was coaching in the US, people said to me, "Oh, I'd love to read your book about that adventure." I'm like, "Book? Yeah, your movie must be incredible." I'm like, "A movie?" And it didn't even occur to me that and the more British adventurers that I speak to, there's so many of them out there who just stop work for 6 months and go do something and then go back to work again. And then that's it.
Wow.
So
very humble.
Well, I don't know whether it's humble or not. But anyway, I suppose my thought was for you, if you want more of those sorts of people, there's probably loads of them just hidden away in the UK doing random, exciting things with not even an Instagram account to cover it.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think it was never about the storytelling, the filmmaking. I really brought that element, but then they became storytellers, to film every day for 9 months, you're going to get pretty good at it. And in the beginning, I think they resisted it a bit and weren't really sure what this was about. And a lot of the footage was very, excuse the pun, but surface level. Like they would say things like, "Oh, the wind is like this, the water's like this, the currents, the weather." And it was like, yeah, all right, but that's not that interesting. Like, I want to know who you are and why you're here and how you're going to face these challenges when inevitably you feel trapped. And so much happens along their journey. The actual journey of rowing across the Pacific Ocean is just one part of the story. It's their friendship and their inner journey and their introspection and their challenges. That's what interested me. So it's funny, when I started making this film and throughout, I kept saying, it's not a film about rowing. Like, of course, on the outset, you're like, okay, we're going to watch them row across the ocean. And you do. But I just remember so clearly having that philosophy of like, no, actually, it's really not a film about rowing at all. It's about the Pacifics we all have to cross in our lives, and using that as a metaphor for the challenges we all face. Like, I didn't want people to watch the film and think, oh, wow, I could never do that. Like, put them on a pedestal, kind of treat them like Olympic athletes, which they are not. They're not professional athletes. In fact, some of them on the team had never rowed before. And that's what I loved about their story, is that they hadn't trained for this their whole lives. They did train. They weren't irresponsible, but they're in all ways just like you and me. They had a goal, they trained for it, they worked hard, and they achieved it. And that was really inspiring to me beyond the rowing itself.
It's interesting. The outdoors is a very, very funny place to spend time, but not necessarily in a tee-hee-ha-ha way. And people do tend to clam up in terms of who they are when they start an adventure, because they're very worried, very concerned around like the practical realities of the staying safe and alive in that environment. There's a lot of pressure, but then ultimately that pressure ends up accumulating and like taking layers of the onion off as to who you are as a human being until you get down to actually where you are. So I'm going to guess, and you can tell me that they got more introspective and more open on camera the longer that they'd been under those pressurized circumstances for.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it was a combination of things. I think it was certainly a bit of that, but also getting more comfortable being on camera. I think that can be a very uncomfortable thing for anyone to do that's not used to it. It's like, why am I going to pick up this camera and start talking to it? That feels very unnatural for most people. But the way that we kind of worked around that was they really addressed the camera like it was me. And that worked so well because we got very close. We're spending 7-10 days together on land at each stop. And they could see my dedication and how much I wanted to tell their story and how committed I was to that. And so we became very good friends, all of us. And so then when they get back in the boat, they'd pick up the camera, and to answer my questions, they would say like, "Hey, Sarah, this is what's going on." And so it wasn't so much like, I'm talking to the camera now. It was like, I'm talking to Sarah, who's like the 5th member of the team. She just happens to be in camera form on the boat. And so that really helped and made it a little bit more natural for them. And yeah, they opened up because it's like you couldn't not. And the first leg of the journey, like I said, a lot of the footage was kind of like, okay, great, the weather, all right. But by leg 2 and leg 3, it was just, there was so much content. I mean, people often want to know how much footage I had. It wasn't like, there's a show in the US at least called Big Brother where they film 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
It was nothing like that. We did not have the hard drive space for that or the budget. But so the footage was very intentional, but I still probably had like over 500 hours of footage, I would say. And so it was such a gift to be able to have a front row seat to this journey. Like, I'm never going to row the ocean. I know that, but I kind of know what it feels like a little, because I got to see 500 hours of it, of them being, you know, in the middle of nowhere, and the breathtaking sunsets and the wildlife and the challenges they faced every step of the way. And it just felt like such a privilege to be able to even watch all of that and figure out how to piece it together for the film.
What did you learn about you through this process? Because it's an emotional roller coaster. I've supported people who've done large expeditions and supported from a distance. A bit like you, I've been like the safety dude on all you can do is watch the GPS tracker and hope that the next time it goes ping that an email comes through quite quickly that says we're fine.
Right.
But you can do nothing. So it's a roller coaster of ups and downs. What did you learn about you or for you from this trip?
Oh my gosh, so much. I mean, there's so many parts to this, right? Because it's, as the filmmaker, when it's your project, nobody hired me to make this, right? I didn't have a boss that was like patting me on the back and saying, you're doing a good job. It was all internal passion, motivation. There was no roadmap for me to complete this project in any certain amount of time. So being a filmmaker is so much like being an entrepreneur. You have to raise money. You have to pitch your idea effectively yourself. You have to put the product, if you will, together, the film itself, which is a huge undertaking, by the way. And then you have to figure out how to market and distribute the film, create revenue from the film to make some of the money back that you spent. It is a long process, and I really enjoy the whole process of making a film, from that first email to when we premiered on Netflix in May 2017. Was about 2.5 years, and it was such a dream come true, but I had no idea how it was going to turn out. Again, I had no clue if they were going to make it across the ocean with my zero knowledge of rowing. So I guess what I learned the most about myself and about anyone is we are capable of so much more than we know. And it's really this idea of just put one foot in front of the other and figure out how to get to that next phase, that next piece of land, you know, how to cross your own Pacific. And you will have changed and grown and proven so much to yourself by doing that, that by the time you look back, you're like, oh, wow, look how much I've grown. Look how much I've changed. Look what I'm capable of now. So I'll always be grateful to the Coxless crew, to this experience making this film, for reminding me that the impossible is possible. You know, a lot of people didn't think they would make it. They certainly didn't have the professional athlete credentials to make it across the Pacific, but spoiler alert, they make it all the way to Australia. It took longer than they hoped it would. But in 9 months, they set 2 world records and just gave me enough inspiration for a lifetime to feel like we as women, as humans, are capable of absolutely anything that we set our minds to. And that, I think, will stay with me forever. So I'll always be grateful.
It's amazing, isn't it? If you take the gender, the male-female thing out of it, and just go from the sheer fact that 4 human beings got in a boat and rowed across the 8,500 miles or something across the Pacific Ocean.
Yes.
That is mind-blowing. And especially as huge numbers of very credible people have epically failed to do it, be it rowing, kayaking, sailing. There's quite a few people who have had a go, but I'm not often lost for words, but wow.
Yeah, it's you know, I loved how Laura Penhall, the team leader, you know, she had the dream, the fire in her heart burned brightest to make this happen for 4 years she worked to get to the start line, arranging a team, raising the money, training, all that could be a whole other film, just like how she even got the boat to the start line. I remember her saying, she says it at the end of the film, but in her interview in Australia, she says, what's stopping you from doing this? One day you're going to find out that someone else did it. And what's going to be the difference between them and you? Nothing, other than you keep getting back up every time you get knocked down. And it's just the fact that she could see that. She could see through the trees. She could see that years down the road, she would achieve this goal by just never giving up is so incredible and so simple, right? Simple in theory, that if you just keep getting back up, you can't lose, So it was just watching them go through this. I just remember every time I would get on a boat. So every time they were close to land, like close to Hawaii, close to Samoa, I would get on a boat with my drone operator and Tony Humphreys, their wonderful shore support. And we would go out and meet them like 8 to 12 hours offshore so that we could get footage of them coming into land. It was beautiful. And I just remember every time we'd see the tiny pink dot on the horizon, like finally the boat would come into view and Tony would be like, oh, there they are. I would just weep. I mean, it was just like immediate. I just couldn't believe it. Like you hear the words, oh, they're rowing 24 hours a day. There's no motor. The boat weighs 1 ton. Like, you're like, yes, okay. Like intellectually you understand. But then when you see it and you're watching them just kill themselves to make this happen and to row and to be so physical and strong. I mean, it was just so incredible. And I would cry and cry and cry and just be like, oh, this is amazing. And it was just, there's no one on the boat but us, and no one even knows they're coming into land. It just would have been such a tragedy to not capture the story. As a filmmaker, that's a dream come true, to have that feeling, to be like, oh, this is so good. And like watching it through your lens, and knowing that at some point someone will watch this and be inspired. That's really, really cool.
Something struck me yesterday when I was watching Losing Sight of Shore. And you don't, I've done a lot of outdoor sports all my entire life. I have never rowed, but sailed, kayaked, all those water sports. And you don't get to see yourself doing it when you're actually doing it, obviously, because you're inside your own body. And there was a piece of drone footage with just 2 of the ladies rowing. Obviously, 2 were in the cabins or wherever they were. And to see how much effort they put in, yet how slowly that boat moves. Like it's that you see them do a stroke and row, and the boat hardly moves, and yet you can see in their physiology that their muscles are strained, and it's almost like a perverse balance of effort versus output, because they put all this effort in and the output is so small, and yet they've got to go again and do another stroke. And there's no choice but to do another stroke, because the next place you meet them is
going back.
Weeks away.
Yeah, I mean, what a good lesson for life. Even if they had wanted to turn around, they couldn't have. It's just the fastest way to the other side was through. The fastest way to get home, to overcome whatever challenge they were going through, was just to keep rowing, and that's such a powerful metaphor too. It's like just one foot in front of the other, one stroke by stroke. And they had this saying on the boat. They had a lot of like philosophies, but one of them was like control the controllable. And I think about that a lot. Like they would had so many challenges, from 4-story waves to tropical storms to, there were plenty of times where they had to get in the cabins and just kind of batten down the hatches and wait out a storm, because physically rowing made no sense, because they weren't going anywhere. They were going backwards. The currents. I mean, there was just challenge after challenge after challenge. And they would just say, control the controllable. Like, okay, what can we do in the next shift, meaning 2 hours? Okay, and then what are we going to do in the next 2 hours? And it's just, what a great lesson of just take the challenge that's right in front of you, and then take the next one and the next one. And before you know it, you will have solved a problem or made progress or gotten some clarity. But it was hard to watch sometimes, even just from the United States on the website, watching them, the numbers, they would sometimes exert themselves the equivalent of like 50 miles in a day, and yet they'd go 9 miles in the wrong direction.
Oh.
And that was just heartbreaking to watch. And those were the moments where, I would call up Tony, their shore support, and be like, are they ever going to get there? Like, is that a possibility that they have to be rescued? Like, I just knew nothing, so it just was, to me, I felt like I represented the audience of asking the questions of like, okay, so what happens if one of them gets injured or they capsize, or my brain just sort of went in 100 directions of all the problems. I'm a producer, so I have to like try to solve problems. And that part of it was really heartbreaking to witness, of just, working. It's like running a marathon and then moving 2 steps forward. How do you make sense of that? And then some days they would make so much progress and everyone would be like, oh yeah, they got this. They'll be in Australia in like a week. And like their parents would book their flights and you're like, wait. So it was just maddening. I felt like although again, I was not on the boat, I felt like my whole life was in limbo for those 9 months, because I was told it was going to take 6 months. And since I know nothing, I believed that. And then the journey just kept getting delayed and delayed. And I just remember like saying to my best friend who was getting married, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be at your wedding. Like, this is so important. I have no idea. Like they own me. Like whenever they're in Samoa, I'm going. Like I was just all in, and I did make it to my friend's wedding, but it was just that whole year was just completely in limbo. And I was like, I don't care what else I have going on. I will be there. So at least I didn't have kids yet. So it was easy to be like, they own me and I will be there in Samoa no matter what.
So I've got a question. So we've both actually, my daughter is probably 6 months older than yours. She's just turned 4.
Oh,
So we've both got little mini adventurers. And both of us about to have new mini adventurers. So congratulations on the next one. Do you know boy or girl yet? Or are you?
A boy, yeah. So I have a girl. I'm having a boy now.
No worries. No way. We're having a boy as well. A girl and a boy.
No way.
Freaky. So anyway, we've both got. Apparently, somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, you're going to have a pigeon pair." I'm like, "What?" And apparently, it's a thing. An older girl and a younger boy is a pigeon pair, as in pigeon the bird.
Why?
I have no idea. Go figure. Anyway, I'll sidetrack both of us very quickly if I'm not careful. So we've both got these mini adventurers. When one of our mini adventurers watches one of your films, and what impact do you want it to have on their life? But not the sort of impact where they come and talk to you or you talk to them about it. Just that they're a different human being at the end of it. They've grown as a human being subtly. What is that you're driving for when somebody watches that, or our little mini adventurers watch your stuff?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, my daughter motivates me in so many ways, some that I can't even articulate now, but truly my mission is to showcase women's stories and strong female role models, because we have so little of that in our media. We're getting more as years go on, thankfully. But when I think about even the content that I was watching growing up, or when I was their age, it's pretty profound how the lack of representation of real women and their stories has an effect on us throughout our entire lives. And men too. If you're not seeing women in positions of leadership, women strong, women athletes, women setting records like the Coxless Crew, and yet men have this entire spectrum of experiences represented on screen in all of their flawed, complex, heroic glory. That has a major impact on all of us over the course of our lives. Having trouble seeing women in positions of leadership in real life, or not treating women equally when it comes to our laws, our relationships, our friendships, anything. So what I'm really passionate about is telling those stories. And it doesn't have to be this big poster for feminism, even though I'm 100% a feminist and believe everyone should be. It just means the equality of men and women socially and politically and economically. That's kind of what I loved about the Coxless Crew and Losing Sight of Shore was they happened to be women. Like, no, I probably wouldn't have signed up to tell the story if it was 4 men, truthfully. But I loved that it wasn't, and they're women. It was just like, these are heroic people doing the impossible, and they happen to be women, which makes it an even more interesting, record-setting adventure for me to want to get involved. So I just hope that my films and films like mine just continue to reinforce how strong women are, how our stories matter, and representation is so important for us in our magazines, in our movies, in our music, everywhere. Women should be present for important conversations about their rights and equality. And the more that we can reflect that in our media, I think the more equal world we will create. So that's what drives me. And then that was already my drive. And then having a daughter just kind of brings that all together times 10. So
it's an incredible experience, isn't it? I should, suddenly occurred to me, after we finish chatting, I should go on Facebook and introduce you to a lady called Freya Hofmeister, a German lady who is, over a few years, she circumnavigated, South America in a kayak on her own. Which,
wow.
and when I say literally over a few years, so Panama Canal all the way south back to the Panama Canal again. She's currently circumnavigating North America, Panama Canal all the way up to the, what do they call it in Alaska, the Northwest Passage, and then back down the East Coast. Over a few years.
Wow.
I'll introduce you. I don't know whether there's ever anything could happen, but in terms of, she's personally one of the most incredible females that I know in the outdoor world. Because, to disappear off around South America on your own for 3 years in a kayak blows my mind.
That's amazing.
Now, I've got a practical question for you now, though, about filmmaking and losing sight of shore. And I've become very well aware that getting the footage you want to produce what ultimately is often short bits of storytelling. When you collect footage in the outdoors, you end up with countless hours of quite dull footage. Like you get 30 million sunsets and sunrises where everything's beautiful. But actually the footage that's the most valuable is when the waves are biggest, it's scariest, people's morale is either highest or lowest. The journey of a story involves big peaks and troughs, doesn't it? Normally that's the bit of a roller coaster. And yet I've also experienced the hardest time to get footage is in those moments. Like when,
right,
when the waves are biggest, and I'd imagine your coxless crew were like gripping those oars with white knuckles. They don't want to reach out and press record on a GoPro.
Totally.
So how did you go about getting that dramatic footage? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So when two of them were rowing at any given time, the other two were doing other jobs for the boat, whether that was creating their own water, eating, fixing something, or filming. That was really part of their tasks. So some of the footage that we got that was more like harrowing was from the two rowers who were not rowing and could film kind of like out the window of the hatch, or could go out on deck and get some footage. But truthfully, their safety was the number one concern, obviously, for them. So I found it to be hard because there were so many times where they would describe, rowing through 4-story waves or facing a tropical storm, and there wasn't the footage to go with it because, of course, it was too dangerous, or the cameras would have gotten ruined, or they couldn't pick up the camera because they were so focused on surviving. So that was probably one of the bigger struggles of the filming process, as well as the editing process, was wanting to tell the whole story in all of its glory and fear and heroism. And part of that was tropical storms, 4-story waves, and, almost capsizing, things like that. But how do you tell that story when you don't have the footage to go with it? So a lot of what we did was in sound editing, actually, because the microphones on the boat were pretty good, but nowhere near capturing the actual magnitude of what they were facing, as well as the drone footage was really only captured within like 12 hours of land and then used throughout the film. So that was a little bit of movie magic on my side, because if I had given them a drone, they would have crashed it on day one and it would be over. So Yeah, it was a lot of creativity in post-production, piecing it together. And then I had an incredible sound editor named Lauren Hadaway. And with her help, we would create the scenes, by hearing a wave crash. So it's a little bit of an optical illusion, right? You're seeing a wave crash over the boat, but you can't possibly understand the magnitude without pulling back. And there was no way for us to pull back without drone footage, without CGI, some kind of computer generated image, which I did not have the budget for and really didn't fit the theme of the film. So yeah, I would say that was probably one of the harder parts about filming this journey, was having them talk about how crazy things were and not having the footage to go with it. And then having to get creative in post-production by piecing it together, and sound was a big part of it.
How do you manage, it's just, I've got a list of random questions, so we'll just go through my list of random questions. So traditionally, when you when you tell a story, you often come up with a storyboard with a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? From once upon a time to they all lived happily ever after. I mean, that's the stereotype.
Yeah.
And so obviously going into this, you've got to have some form of storyboard in your planned out, because you're not going to get money from anybody to produce anything without, like, here's what we're going to do at the end. But how do you balance that with then the moving dynamic of the outdoors, of the without losing the real story? Because you could almost impose your story on top of what was really happening without, I don't know, I'm making sense. Like, there's like a compromise.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's funny. It's like with a narrative film, with a scripted film, you write the script, you might write it for years, you develop the entire idea, then you bring on actors and find locations and hire, get costumes and makeup. And then by the time you're editing a narrative film, it's pretty close to the script that you wrote most of the time. And documentary is really the opposite. You're going to capture, and then you're kind of going to write the script as you edit. So really, like, the forming of the story is when you're editing. And that's why I always say, like, if you gave the same 10 filmmakers the same hard drive, they would make 10 very different films of documentary, because it's really all comes together in the editing. And some people would comment about Losing Sight of Shore and say, like, oh, I wanted to know more about the rowing or the technical part or the weather. And it was like, yeah, okay, but that's not the film that I wanted to make. I wanted to make a film about friendship and perseverance and the power of the human spirit. And so had another filmmaker had their hands on this footage, it would have turned out completely different. And so for documentary, especially one of this nature, I didn't really do any storyboards, but my early documents are called like treatments or proposals. So as I'm pitching to production companies, investors, grants, crowdfunding, trying to raise money to make the film, I'm writing what I think will happen. And then as the journey's going on, I'm evolving that document to reflect what actually happens. So I would use quotes and images from the journey. And then by the time they actually completed the journey, it's essentially like I'm writing the outline of the film. And so for this film, it was really about character for me. Because again, I didn't really care about the rowing so much. I thought it was extraordinary, obviously, but I wanted to know who these women are and how their past would dictate what it was like on the boat and how they would handle challenges, their interpersonal connections, what they were sort of leaving behind, what they were giving up to be on the boat. So that really drove me. And even that helped so much when sifting through the footage. If you're watching 500 hours of footage, you better know what you're looking for. Otherwise, it's not going to be very helpful to watch 500 hours without being clear with what it is story you're telling. And so what I mean by that is, like, Emma Mitchell's a perfect example. She's one of the rowers in the boat, and her story arc is that she began the journey as like their resident rower, right? She'd been rowing her whole life, like for fun. It's in school, not professionally, but she was like our rower. She had the most experience, and she was very introverted. She's very, a little bit stoic, like less emotional. But she was like, oh, we can depend on Emma. She's going to get us through this challenge because she's our rower. And by the end of the second leg, when they're going from Hawaii to Samoa, Emma's really like fallen out of love with rowing, which is profound because that's been a big part of her identity her whole life. And I know any athlete listening knows that feeling, right? Of defining yourself through a sport, and then you get injured or you don't get into the professional league of that sport and you suddenly have to re-identify some other way. And so that was really profound to me. That's a huge change of one of our characters, right? This person that loved rowing, and then by 2/3 in, she's saying, I never want to row again. I'm miserable. I hate this. So to me, when I saw that piece of footage at the end of leg 2, I thought, okay, we have a movie, because that's a significant change for one of our heroes to go through. So it wasn't so much about, oh, they face this huge storm and how do they overcome that? It was like, no, this inner storm that Emma went through is one of the story arcs that I wanted to showcase. And so as a filmmaker, you kind of then work backwards, because if I know that's where Emma is headed by the end of Act 2, if you will, because this journey was kind of like a perfect 3-act structure for the hero's journey, then how do I build that so that by the time the audience sees that scene where she's crying and upset and says, I never want to row again, how do I build up to that? So then that really informs all the decisions that I'm making in Act 1 of how to present Emma, how to describe Emma, how to see Emma. And so I kind of had to figure out what the journey was for each of the rowers, and where do they start, where do they end up, and then how do I tell that story? So then when I'm watching the footage, I'm looking for clues to put that arc together, because I know where we're ending up. So it wasn't so much storyboarding. It was more like being very clear with what each of the women's personal journey would be, and then what they bring to the team. Because although, they might look alike, they are nothing alike. They're extremely different people. So, yeah.
That's incredible. And I love the quote you have at the start of the film. You can never cross the ocean until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I love that quote so much. It was really lovely, because I remember I was trying to think of a title for the film, and my dad said that quote to me when I was in college and I was really homesick. Like, I had never lived away from home before. I moved from Chicago, Illinois to Miami, Florida, which is very far. I didn't know anybody, super homesick. And my dad said that to me, you can never cross the ocean unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. And it really stuck with me, because it's just so clear what that means. It's this idea of you have to leave your comfort zone. You have to actually do something different in order to get to that next phase of life or achieve that challenge. And so I held that kind of in my heart. And that was in like 2004. And then when I was trying to think of a title for the film, I was looking through the Coxless Crew website, coxlesscrew.com, and they had that quote on their website. And I was like, oh, that's it. So I read the whole quote and I was like, oh, it should be losing sight of shore. And I just thought it just perfectly encapsulated, of course, their journey in a very literal sense, but, this metaphorical part as well. And then I came up with the tagline, everyone has a Pacific to cross, because I really wanted the film to be inviting. I didn't want it to be like, if you're not a rower, you won't like it. I really wanted it to be everyone, you'll get it. Like, there's a universal journey here. There's a universal message. So yeah, I'm really, really proud of the title, and it always meant so much to me and to them. So it was really perfect.
It's cool. I love that quote. I've never seen that quote before, actually, until I started watching the movie. And I'm like, that makes so much sense. I have to let go of yesterday so I can step into tomorrow. That makes so much sense. So much sense. Now, you might not be aware of this, but maybe you are, that you've created a problem with this film. And this is a parenting problem for both of us. And so I'm curious about, you document and put out there what an incredible thing these 4 heroes have done in this boat together. There's a fair chance that when our daughters watch that, one of them's going to say, hey, I want to ... a Pacific Ocean.
Totally.
Like, as a parent, how are you going to manage that inside when your daughter says something like that to you?
Totally. I mean, I can only think of the parents of the Coxless Crew, who I spent a lot of time with on land. They were terrified that something was going to happen to their daughters, and they were between the ages of 25 and 40, these women, so they were all different kind of phases of their life. I don't know what would happen if and when my daughter comes to me and is like, I'm going to go do this super dangerous thing. Bye. I would hope that she would at least have trained for it and be prepared for it and not be taking it lightly. That's all easier said than done. But how about you? What about when your daughter says, hey, Dad, I'm going to go row the ocean. I'm going to kayak the Atlantic.
You have that mixture of incredible pride and incredible love and incredible admiration for this thing that you've produced that has suddenly decided they're going to go and do something. And at the same time, I think just immense amounts of fear. The thing that goes through my head is, for me personally, when somebody shows me that they're afraid for my well-being, I normally perform worse than if somebody's like, yeah, go do it. You'll be fine. You can do this. And it's not words. It's like the sensation that somebody gives off. And so for me, it's about, how do I manage that, my fear? Because it's not their fear. It's our parenting fear, really. How do I manage my parenting fear in a way that doesn't go and give them that subtle message of, it could go horribly wrong? Because the likelihood of it going horribly wrong, if they have that feeling, is actually dramatically increased because their confidence goes down. So for me, it's like, how do I manage that fear without, inside of me, without like dumping it as a pile of poo on top of Caitlin? That's my, I don't have the answer. Can I tell you a worrying yet funny story? So a few days ago, I'm sat at this desk I'm at now. I'm doing an interview. My wife's a psychologist and she's got a client in crisis. Caitlin's at home, and we had this like epic of, we just need to get Caitlin engaged in something for 45 minutes because the world's going upside down. And you're a parent, you've been through COVID, you know what it's all about. So we've got a swimming pool in our garden. So I locked the gates to the swimming pool it's not like a lock, but with 3 bolts. And anyway, about half an hour later, Caitlin comes through to me and she's undone the gate to the swimming pool and she's taken herself swimming.
What?
And she comes through dripping wet, padding through to my office with a smile on her face, with this huge degree of pride in her eye, in their how they look and how about themselves. This huge degree of pride as, Daddy, I've taken myself swimming. And in my heart, I've got this, oh my goodness me, I'm the world's worst parent.
Thank goodness she's okay.
Yeah, wow. That's it. Thank goodness she's okay. I mean, in the shallow end of our pool, she can just about stand with her head back, and there's a shallow step that she plays on. And so I'm like, oh my goodness me. And she's so happy that she's been a grown up and taken herself swimming and has obviously had a good time and now proudly wants to tell Daddy what she's done. And yet at the same time, I've got terror going through my insides.
Wow. That's terrifying. But you're like, okay, good job, I guess. But never do that again.
That's it. But next time, could you please tell me before you're going to take yourself swimming so I can come and watch you, or like, but I guess that was my like check on, that's like your daughter saying, I'm going to go and row the Pacific Ocean. And you don't really, those parents didn't know what was involved really in rowing the Pacific Ocean until after they rowed the Pacific Ocean.
Totally. No, it was really heartbreaking and inspiring to be around the parents, especially coming in to Australia. It was quite an undertaking and ordeal. You'll see in the film, if you watch, people listening, it's quite an ordeal of that, getting them into the marina in Australia. Things do not go as planned, to say the least. And the parents just were, on the edge of their seat. Some of them had been in Australia for weeks waiting, just anticipating so much, finally seeing their daughters again. And I felt for them. I had my own stress going on of making the film. And then these parents there just wanting to make sure their daughters are alive and safe and happy and healthy. So it was a lot of emotion going on all the time.
I bet in that 500 hours of footage you've got, I bet there's a whole nother story for parents out there about the parents' journey.
Yeah, I would interview them every time I was with them. So in San Francisco and Hawaii and then Australia, most of the parents did not make it to Samoa. It just was like such a remote island, and to go there at the drop of a hat is not cheap. And they were coming from England, so it was very far. But every time I was with them in person, I would interview them as well. So yeah, there's a lot that I didn't get to include about what the parents were going through. But yeah, it's really amazing. I commend them for allowing, not that their daughters were like, can I go? They weren't asking permission, but for them to step aside and say like, okay, I see that you have to do this and I believe in you is really amazing.
It's incredible. So people out there would love to know, how do you go about making a documentary, being a filmmaker? What are you, I know you've written a book about it. People can go find that on Amazon, and there's a link below. Well, there will be a link below when this goes live for your book. But what are your top tips for people who maybe have the outdoors is a hobby and they want to go and make a YouTube video once a month about their hobby and document what they love? What would you give as like some how to get started advice for those people?
Yeah, I would say great decision. It's such a fun career, and I love putting films together from start to finish. There's so many aspects to it. I feel like I get to use all different parts of my brain, from legal side, when you have to take part in contracts and asking questions, fundraising, how are you going to raise the money to make the film? What's your budget? What is this going to cost? To what lens should I use? What questions should I ask in an interview to elicit an emotional response? To editing, how do you piece this together? What kind of music do you want in the background? How are you going to color the film? Like color correction is a big part of it. There's just graphics, all of that it's been just such a gift to learn all of that. And that's why I wrote a book called Empowered Filmmaking, How to Make a Documentary on Your Own Terms. And there's a lot of behind the scenes info about Losing Sight of Shore, as well as my 2 other films. And it's just a very practical book about how to make a feature-length documentary from start to finish. Especially if you've never done it before, or you need some advice from someone who's been there, done that. And I've never had a big production company behind me yet, or a celebrity executive producer, or all these resources, like none of that. I've just had passion, enthusiasm, drive, heard a good story like these rowers, and wanted to get started. So if you have something you want to showcase, whether it's your own sport or someone else, I think that's awesome. It's really just getting a camera that you're comfortable with, if you're going to be the one filming, or working with a cinematographer that you really like working with, that's flexible, easy, and being able to capture some great images. Great sound is important as well. People often overlook sound, but having good microphones to go with the cameras that you're purchasing or renting or using is really important as well. Let's see, backing up your footage is also important. I can't tell you how many times I had to back up, triple back up, quadruple back up my footage for Losing Sight of Shore, because especially if you're traveling, you might lose it or it might get damaged somehow. You want to make sure that you have multiple copies of the footage so that if anything happens, you have options. I would say editing is a long process. It's a beast. If you're making a feature, of course, it's going to take a lot longer than a short. But in editing, just getting to the heart of what is the story that you're trying to tell? What do you want the audience to feel when they're watching this piece, this film, whatever it is that you're making? Keep that clear in your mind and your heart, so that as you move forward in editing, you can make decisions stemming from that, rather than just like, oh, this is the coolest shot, or this part was so funny. It's like you need to have an overarching goal so that you can lead to, the feeling that you want the audience to have. So, and then distribution, I think, is an often overlooked phase of the process, but who's your audience? Who's going to want to watch this piece that you're making? Is it people just like you that are interested in the same things as you? Can it be more diverse than that? Who would pay for this content, or who would watch this content? And what are their habits? That's like the next step of like the marketing brain. It's not just who would like it, but okay, if a group of athletes, let's say people that love the outdoors, would love your film, okay, well, where do they go to watch their content typically? And everyone's different, but do they all watch Netflix? Do they all watch HBO in the US? Or do they go to the movie theater to see documentaries? No? Okay. How much might they pay to watch what you're making? Or do you want to provide it free somehow through a sponsor or a partner? So those are some kind of like overarching things that I'm often thinking about throughout the filmmaking process.
That's super cool. I'm going to give your book to a bunch of people, actually. So do you mind if I do a little shameless plug about something we've got coming up?
Please, go for it.
On the 1st of January, we're going to launch We Get Outdoors TV, a play on demand, like imagine Netflix, but for the outdoors only.
Cool.
It's in beta testing right now, and it's going live. And we've got a whole series of outdoor filmmakers, producers, and rank amateurs who want to put their stories up. So I'm going to give your book to all those people to help them on their journey to producing cool content. We're going to have a competitor for the Discovery Channel on a much bigger basis.
Awesome, love it.
It's my.
I pitched Losing Sight of Shore to the Discovery Channel, and they did not even watch it. They were not interested because they told me that Discovery Channel's audience is, quote, middle of America male. And the insinuation of that comment is that they would then not be interested in a woman's story, that women were rowing the boat so that middle of America male does not want to watch women's stories. These are the kinds of obstacles you have to overcome as a filmmaker, as a woman filmmaker. These are the kinds of things that you hear all the time, that men do not want to watch stories about women. And it's like we say these things over and over and over again that we believe them to be true, even though it's not. So I love that you're starting your own version of the Discovery Channel because we need it. And it's ridiculous that sometimes we get caught in these patterns of believing a certain thing that's not true.
It's very interesting you say that because the Discovery Channels, that's very interesting. When I love some of the stuff on the Discovery Channel, like their survival programs and like getting lost in Alaska. It's very interesting. I'll love it, and my wife will come in and she'll ask me when we're going to watch something different. And but how much of their footage is skewed that way?
Yes, and my friend just worked with them as well, and she said their brand is Men in Peril, which is true.
Wow. It's very interesting that people who are truly into the outdoors they don't really, I won't say they don't care about gender. They don't care about gender. I don't mean that in a negative way. They care about human beings doing incredible things in the outdoors. And
exactly.
I
agree.
It's very interesting when you speak honestly to outdoor people and you talk about all of the different gender issues that we face today. Through what pronouns we use, just as a for instance, they get very irritated very, very quickly because they're like, well, if you want to be called Sarah and you want to be a filmmaker, I'm just going to love you because you're Sarah and you want to be a filmmaker. I don't care about, it's not that they don't care about anything else. They just like, go be Sarah and be a filmmaker. If you want to be called, you want to be called George and you want to be a pole dancer, go be George and be a pole dancer. We'll love you for George and a pole dancer. Like we don't.
Yeah.
And it's not about care is the wrong word. But it's not how those outdoor people's brains work. They're like, awesome.
Yeah.
Like
great.
Your name's Caitlin and you want to be a fisherman or fisher person. Go do fishing. Love it. Like don't let it's very, very, they're a very different breed of people to put stuff in front of. It's interesting.
I love that.
Anyway, so we've spoken about the outdoors. We've spoken about losing sight of shore, about parenting, fears of parenting, maybe, about letting go of yesterday to move into tomorrow. What I'm really interested in, your letting go of yesterday and moving into tomorrow is what next for Sarah? Like what's other than becoming a mum again, what's in your pipeline of life?
Yeah, well, this has been a really tricky year for everyone, certainly all over the world. For filmmakers, it's been really tough because so much opportunity has gone away. You know, funding opportunities have gone away. Production was really put on hold. So it's been a really tough year for me personally. Just kind of recalibrating my expectations of what I would be doing this year. I thought I would be traveling all over the place. A lot of the work that I do involves travel. In terms of teaching, speaking, filming. I just finished my third feature-length documentary, the film I made after losing Center Shore, which is called Nevertheless. And it's all about sexual harassment in the workplace, so very different in tone, but the same theme to tag back to of showcasing women's stories, you know, trying to make the world a safer place for women to exist in. I'm really, really proud of the film. We had an in-person premiere in February, which was wonderful, with real life movie theater and real life humans. But we've been doing like virtual screenings of the film this year, which has been really wonderful, actually, to be able to bring people together on Zoom to watch the film, to talk about these important themes. So for me, I want to do more of that. Moving forward, I want to continue to help get Nevertheless, my latest film, out into the world. Because I know it can do a lot of good. It's really kind of the intersection of social impact and storytelling. It's activism, all of that rolled into a cinematic, entertaining experience. So a lot of what I've been doing this year is finding different companies to bring the film to, and schools and organizations to start these really important conversations, or continue these really important conversations about gender-based violence, equality. I would love to make more films, many more films in my lifetime. It's just got to be the right story, the right situation. Now that I'm a mom, about to become a mom of two, you know, it's harder to bootstrap it and work for free for a long time and like hope that a film will create revenue. And I really hope I can bring on bigger partners sooner in my process so that I can have a full budget from the start. So just kind of advancing in my filmmaking career. I would love to, you know, team up with interesting people and tell amazing stories, especially those that spotlight women. That's kind of my greatest passion. Yeah, I would love to do more speaking engagements, which have very much been put on hold this year, obviously, but I've been doing some virtually. I do a lot of teaching. So I teach documentary filmmaking. I wrote this book all about how to make a documentary. So I just kind of want to continue doing what I'm doing, which is many buckets. And it sounds like a bunch of different jobs, but to me, it's all the same. And it's just different versions of storytelling. So, you know, it's going to be a difficult transition getting back into the newborn phase, you know, being sleep deprived. We're both in for that very soon. Yeah. But I hope that I can have the clarity to know that there is, you know, a Pacific to cross in new parenthood, no matter what baby you're on. So I want to give myself kind of the grace and the space to be in that newborn phase, but then come out the other side stronger and more resilient, and find ways to continue my career in the direction that it's going, which I'm very happy with, just wanting to continue to be a storyteller. So yeah, all of that. Who knows? I guess this year, if this year has taught us anything, is that we have no idea what's coming next, and you got to roll with the punches. And so I'm taking that. I'm trying not to be so much of a planner and a forward thinker. All I want to do is like have it all mapped out and scheduled, and that's just not the way the world works anymore. So I'm going to let it be and be as present as possible and just like enjoy the journey.
What an incredible year this has been. I think this has been an incredibly bad and an incredibly good year, or both at the same time.
Yeah.
I've got a really curious question for you that's just struck me and actually takes me completely out of sequence where I'd normally be when I chat with somebody. But I want to chuck it in there because I think it's nothing to do with the outdoors, but I equally think it's really important. It goes to your Nevertheless documentary. It strikes me that with documentaries like Nevertheless, and I haven't watched it, so I'm not informed about its content, but I have watched similar documentaries with a similar style or a message, not about sexual harassment, but for instance, there was the Game Changers veganism in sport one on Netflix, for instance. It's similar. I don't know. It's similar, but in some respects, the people who really need to engage with Nevertheless is not the obvious audience. Because the audience who will really go, hell yeah, Nevertheless, this is my film, is Me Too activist, BLM supporter, Democratic Biden voter. Like that's the people who will see that and go, yeah, I identify with that. However, the people who really need to watch it and hear it are none of the above. They're none of those people. So how, with what you're doing, you probably know where I'm going now. How do you go and take that message and go, Mr. Far Right dude, let's say, Mr. Far Right man who thinks that Trump is a bit soft, like that, that guy. How do you go and take something and package it in a way that he can engage with it and start having that thought going in his head? And the thought isn't, oh my goodness me, somebody else wants to change who I am as a human being, deprive me of my identity, and actually I'm just going to hate you for it, and I can't engage with the topic to even, because it's such a controversial topic.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, and I'm glad you bring this up, because that's really, Nevertheless, is by design meant to be seen by everyone. But you're right that nothing will change if only women watch it that already support this, that maybe are victims and survivors themselves. You don't want to just preach to the choir when you make a film, although I want women who have experienced this to feel heard and seen, of course. Nothing will, the needle will not be moved unless, let's face it, unless men are watching a film like Nevertheless and seeing their role in the solution. And so that's really what the film is about. It's not about one bad guy or one bad company or these like splashy headlines about lawsuits and money and, someone who got like Me Too'd. It's really not about that. It's 7 individual stories of men and women who have experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault in the workplace or school context. And then we have this incredible chorus of experts that really weave between the 7 stories that talk about the larger systematic issues at play. Because the message of the film is really, how did we get here? How did we get to Me Too, #MeToo? And where are we hopefully going from here together? So my goal with Nevertheless is for everyone to watch it and not have it be an us versus them, men versus women, because that's actually the furthest from the truth and the furthest from the solution. It's really about, wow, how have I been complicit as a white cisgender woman of a certain amount of privilege in America? How have I been complicit or enabled this behavior? What are my experiences, and how can I be an allyship to other people going through this? Or, it's the same parallel journey with BLM, with Black Lives Matter. How have I as a white person been complicit, been enabling to racist behavior? And how can I be more introspective and be an allyship to people of color now that I've come to this realization? It's the same journey. And so in Nevertheless, we address intersectionality, race, privilege, toxic masculinity, how we raise our children. Our legal system, at least in the United States, is deeply flawed with how it addresses cases of sexual harassment. We actually follow the passing of a law that tries to help clarify the legal standard of sexual harassment in California, at least. So I'm so glad you bring this up, because that's really by design. I've had a film on Netflix, Losing Side of Shore was on Netflix. And my best example of this is through that film, because it was categorized on Netflix as a sports documentary, which, let's face it, it is those things, but it's also so much more than that. And so in some ways, it was frustrating to have such the biggest platform in the world, literally. Netflix is in 190 countries. The film was subtitled in 25 languages. They have over 160 million subscribers all over the world. And yet, if you're not already watching content that is very similar to Losing Side of Shore, you would never know it existed. So perhaps your listeners might have seen it come up on their queue because of the algorithm, and they're already prone to watching extreme sports, films about anything sport related. There's nothing wrong with that. But how do I access this whole other layer of people that might love the film, but just because they've never watched a film about sports doesn't mean they wouldn't like it. And so I kind of was able to see up close the shortcomings of being on such a global platform and having $0 of marketing budget of my own to sway people in any other direction. And Netflix wasn't going to spend $1 to market the film. The way they market is on their algorithm on the platform. And so when it came to Nevertheless, I really took all that knowledge and brought it and thought, okay, I really don't want to, it's not like I would turn Netflix down. I mean, that would be very hard. But if Nevertheless was placed on Netflix, let's face it, it would be called a feminist film, an activist film, a women's film. And the people that I want to see it, men of all different backgrounds, ages, ethnicities, socioeconomic statuses, would never know it existed and would never watch it. And if their wife or partner turned it on a Friday night, they'd be like, I'm going to go play video games in the other room. Let me know when you're done. So that's the truth. That's sort of the landscape that we live in. And so with all of that said, I'm working with a wonderful distributor called IndieFlix based here in the US. And with their help, we are screening Nevertheless exclusively in workplaces, schools, organizations, and corporations of all sizes all over the world for that exact reason, that we want Nevertheless to be put in a sexual harassment training program as part of perhaps mandatory content that employees, students are watching, because we really see the value of the discussion that happens afterwards. If you just watch a film like this passively, while you're on your phone, while you're not really paying attention, while, oh, my wife is watching it and I saw some of it, you're not going to get as much out of it as if there's a panel discussion afterwards. We have a discussion guide that goes with the film. So we've been very intentional about this film being a tool for change, a tool for conversation. And that's what we're seeing. So this year we've been screening all over the place virtually. And the kinds of conversations that transpire after watching a film like Nevertheless, it can go in 10 different directions depending on what the priorities and intentions are of that workplace or school. So it's truly been wonderful so far to distribute the film this way. And I'm just really passionate about continuing down this path for everything that you just said. I don't want to make a film that just preaches to the choir and gets a bunch of views or clicks. Like that's not what I'm in it for. I didn't make this film for 3 years to just preach to the choir. I made it so that I can actually help change hearts and minds and have everyone feel like they are part of the solution rather than it just being like, women are being harmed, men are doing the harming, you fix it. Like, that's not going to do anything.
It's just upset everybody.
Yeah, so I mean, there's tons of films out there which are very important as well about those, monsters at the top, the men who've been Me Too'd, the Harvey Weinsteins, the Bill Cosbys. Those stories obviously are important, and those people there should be consequences for their actions. But this is a cultural shift we need. This is not an ousting one bad guy that's going to solve the problem. It's a whole system of behavior and history and culture that brought us here in the first place. And if we don't start to address that in a more holistic way, from the way that we speak to each other to, eradicating the actual harassment and assault, then nothing ever will really change. So I think the Me Too movement is so important. It brought so much awareness to what's actually going on in our world. But what do we do from here? So that's really what the film is about.
It's hard, isn't it? Because the thing that is the reality of the Me Too movement is that it needs far more patience than it's actually willing to accept it needs, in my opinion, because to create a more balanced world in gender terms, we're looking to change 2,000 years of hierarchical behavior.
Definitely.
And there's a really cool book out there called Generations, and it talks about intergenerational change, and it talks about, and it was focused around apartheid South Africa. How long does it take? I won't say to right the wrongs of apartheid South Africa, but actually to bring a balance. And we're talking a very rustic white-black balance. I mean, it's a very basic thing. And all of the research throughout the past 2,000 years suggests it often takes 4 times longer than the time it took to cause the problem to actually solve it.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, well, and so I sit back as a observer and watch the world, and I'm like, I get what everybody's driving for. I'm with you. Like I'm on the journey, but I think the pace of change that people want to go and put in place could be almost as destructive by accident if you try and fast track it. Like you could almost destruct as much as you construct at the same time by like pushing too hard, too fast. A bit like putting a 16-year-old in a Ferrari on ice and saying, hey, you've just got your driving license, go drive the car. The 16-year-old's going to feel invincible until they drive it into a brick wall. And actually, the 16-year-old driving the car has to maybe drive something slower and less powerful with less walls around before they step up into the Ferrari. And I just have this thing in my heart that says everything everybody wants to do is great, but we all need to be far more patient than we actually are. And in the world of instant gratification of social media, people's levels of patience is decreasing very, very quickly. And I find it a fascinating headache to play through in my head.
Absolutely.
It's and because everybody wants the results now, but I don't think to change the attitude of generations is probably going to take generations, sadly.
Yeah. Well, hopefully a little quicker than that.
Well, hopefully. Well, I mean, the starting point is as many people as possible doing the right thing. If everybody does the right thing, we will progress. So my last question for you before I let you go and get some sleep, because I've just looked at the time and realized I've kept you till almost 9:30 at night your time, is if you have a message for the world or a rant or something you want to get off your chest, what is your message for the world, Sarah?
Yeah, gosh, what to choose? I would say in light of this conversation for all of us as consumers, because all of us are consumers in some regard, to pay more attention to the media that we're watching, because you need to be thinking about perhaps who is the one making the media, who is behind the camera, whose story is it, how is that story being told, because your vote, of course your vote, but your dollar, your remote, the choices that you're making, every click, every like that you're making is adding up to more content in that same vertical or in that same regard. So I would just say own the power that we all have as consumers and watch more content perhaps outside of your comfort zone, outside of your genre, to diversify the kind of content that will then come into your orbit, because so much of our lives apparently are guided by these algorithms. And pay attention to who's the one making it. Are there women behind the camera? If you sit and watch the credits for your favorite movie that was about a women's story or not, were there any women producing it, directing it? Were they cinematographers? Were they editors? And if there weren't, why weren't there? I think I often hear, in Hollywood, at least, it's a huge problem, the disparity between men and women, certainly between people of color and white individuals, not getting their chance, not getting their shot. And so much of my career has me been realizing, oh, that phone call's never going to come. I'm never going to get that perfect opportunity brought to me. I better go create it myself. And Losing Sight of Shore, for example, is a film that no one would have ever hired me to make. No way. I had to just go down the path, figure it out, and prove that I was the right person for it because I knew it in my heart. And so that's often what happens to women in the film industry, is you have to continue to go down the path alone, prove yourself, and then maybe you'll get hired for the next one or the next one because you've gone out and you've said, look, I'm capable. So I suppose my rant is just to be smarter consumers in terms of our media. Who is the one behind the camera? Who's the one telling the stories? How can you help support women, people of color, whose stories are not being told in the more commercial sense? But there's so many incredible storytellers and directors out there that are dying to get their films on screen. Maybe they need your support in the form of a crowdfunding campaign or a grant that you're on the foundation board for. I don't know. But how can you try to help support getting more diverse stories on screen? Because we have so much power as consumers that we don't often take ownership of. So every choice you're making with your dollar, your vote, your remote is adding up to something. So help create a more equal media landscape.
I love it. I think people think they only vote once every 4 or 5 years, and they don't actually realize, as you said, every dollar, every click is actually a vote.
It is, absolutely.
You're subtly voting the world to go in a certain way by those clicks. That's kind of exciting and terrifying to have that degree of. Yeah, I don't think people realize that they have, with those algorithms, we actually have far more control than we realize. We can direct those algorithms by our actions, and we already are. That's incredible. Yeah. So, Sarah, if people want to come and check you out, hang out with you, get in touch with you, anything or any of the above, or watch Losing Sight of Shore or Nevertheless, how do they go about doing that? Where do they find you? How do they say, hey, I've got a great idea for a film. Come make it for me. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So Losing Sight of Shore was on Netflix for 3 years. It's no longer on Netflix, but you can find it on iTunes and Amazon, as well as hopefully some more places soon. If you want to learn more about that film, you can just go to losingsightofshore.com. We also sell DVDs on the website. If you happen to want to purchase a DVD, that's where they are. Nevertheless, my latest film, as I mentioned, it's not available on any of these platforms as of yet. But if you're interested in jumping in on one of our virtual screenings or hosting a virtual screening of your own in your workplace or your school, you can go to neverthelessfilm.com. If you want to get in touch with me, Sarah Moshman, you can go to sarahmoshman.com, SarahMoshman.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, at Sarah Moshman on Instagram, at Sarah Mosh on Twitter. And I would love to hear from you. So come check me out.
Cool. And I just apologize in advance if your inbox gets full, but that's just that's just the way it is. Sarah, thank you.
And then finally, I should mention my book. Sorry. And my book is Empowered Filmmaking, How to Make a Documentary on Your Own Terms. And it's on Amazon. You can order it on Kindle or on paperback.
Cool. And there's a link below. I'm just about to go and buy your book. I said I'm going to buy it for everybody, but the first person I'm going to buy it for is my business partner. And for our TV channel, we have a series that we're calling Challenge Mark. Mark's a real amateur in the outdoors. And so we're going to come up with some weird and wonderful, like canoeing down the Yukon solo and not getting eaten by bears type documentaries. And he's going to be the first person to start wrapping his head around your book and how we're going to take it and put it into practice.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for your time on Friday night, and good luck with the next month and becoming a mum again and all those things. Stay incredible, and I encourage everybody to go and watch Losing Sight of Shore and find a way of either doing a screening or watching Nevertheless and reading your book. What an incredible opportunity to go and widen our perspective of the world. Sarah, thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much.